the Sixers had their struggles on Saturday night. We're going to dive into that. Sixers insider Paul Hudrick set to join us from 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out all of Paul's coverage on Twitter at Paul Hudrick. And, of course, listen to his podcast, Coming In for a Landing, as we bring you now here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Paul Hudrick, of course, Sixers and the Pacers tonight. And, of course, Paul, everybody wants to know what happened on Saturday night. I mean, people were going bonkers. Saturday night, they lose to the Cavs for the second time this season. So what was maybe something that was concerning that you saw in that loss from Saturday night?
Just the lack of energy in general. Just the lack of it. Just seemed like they weren't there. They were flat, especially in the first half. It was bad. You saw some defensive lapses. Obviously, the transition defense was terrible. It's been bad actually for a good chunk of the season. So if you're having kind of a long-term concern, I'd say that's still a pretty big one for me is the transition defense. And I thought in the half-court sets, they looked really bad. I mean, it looked like they were basically counting on Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons to make something happen. And if neither of them did, then nothing happened. Obviously, Seth Curry going 1 for 13, that can't happen. So just a lot of things that you could say, yeah, this was just a bad night. But I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me that's been a season-long problem is that transition defense. They really have to get that figured out.
Yeah, I know another thing they have problems with is if you're matched up with a team that's going to have those smaller, quicker guards. I feel like that was a big problem again. We saw it with De'Aaron Fox. We've seen it in the past, with guys like Spencer Dinwiddie when they played against Kyrie, that when the team has that small, explosive, quick guard, the Sixers have a problem there.
Yeah, but so in the first half, I think Colin Sexton had 16 points, and a lot of that was off of transition from bad turnovers, and the Cavs just simply out hustling them and having more energy and getting the ball down the other end of the floor. If you look at the second half, I think Sexton was something like 4 for 14 in the third, fourth quarter, and overtime. And then Darius Garland he didn't get going. He had 8 points in the overtime, but he really didn't get going until then. Combined, they were like 20 of 50, I think. Combined. So it's not like they completely scorched the Sixers defense, through all four quarters. I thought Sexton definitely got them early a couple times, and I thought Garland got them in the OT. But to me, again, that wasn't the biggest issue. I thought in the second half, I thought Ben Simmons did a pretty darn good job on Colin Sexton. So I mean that it's concerning that I get just the game, I guess in general was just concerning. There is something to that, Mike, that in the past, yes, smaller guards. You mentioned Dinwiddie's a good one. He's a guy that's killed them in the past, but I think they've done much better against that, especially in the pick and roll. I think they've been significantly better against the pick and roll this season. Some of that has to do with some defensive adjustments they've made. But I wasn't as overly concerned as maybe some people were, because when you look at the numbers at the end of the game, Sexton and Garland really didn't kill them. I thought it was, again, if Seth Curry is 2 of 12 in regulation, they win the game. Or if they just come out with a little bit of energy in the beginning, they win the game. So that wasn't as concerning to me as it was to some.
All right, so one of the things, and like I tweeted after the game, frustrating loss, yes. No need to have a hot take or overreact. You lose some games like this in the course of usually 82 in a 72. It is frustrating that you lose to that team. No Harris. Guess what? You should beat that team with or without Harris. But what I kind of take from that is, if Shake Milton's my best option off the bench in a playoff series, there's going to be nights where that moment might be too big for him. That's the kind of game where I'm looking at, like Milton's got 11 points. He's playing 30 minutes because Harris is out. Can I trust Shake Milton as being my best offensive option in a playoff series? That's what I kind of took from watching that game.
Well, I think Shake can be a part of it, and when you look at the playoffs, it's obviously going to be different. The rotation is going to be different. The starters are obviously going to play much bigger minutes. We'll see if maybe they, add a starter, perhaps maybe upgrade the starting lineup at some point down the road. But to your point, Mike, I would say that he can't be your only option, because that's where we're at right now. He is the only option. Dwight Howard against some centers. You saw the other end against Dallas when they kind of have, bigger plotting kind of guys, play in the 5. Yeah, Dwight Howard can have a good night and he can match up really well. But then when you have more mobile guys, they're going to give Dwight Howard some problems. So I would say the issue right now is that Shake Milton is my only guy that I trust, because as great as Matisse Thybulle is as a defender, we all know the issues he has offensively. And then, even then he's got lately, he's kind of in a little bit of a downward turn. I think he's getting a little jumpy again, maybe taking a little too many chances, committing some fouls, some cheap fouls that he was kind of eliminating while he's playing well. But, again, offensively, that's the biggest issue there. And if Furkan Korkmaz, you never know what you're getting with that guy. I mean, he could, hit 10 shots in a row where he could literally not hit a shot for a month. So it's so hard to get consistency out of those guys. So I would say I do believe Shake Milton is a good enough player that he can be an important bench piece in the playoffs, but he can't do it alone. They need at least one or two more bench pieces to complement him and to really complement the starting five as well.
I agree with that I can count on him to be a part of my rotation. But if I'm going into the series and he's my sixth man that I need to score 14, 15 points coming off the bench that night, and I'm in a matchup with, a tough, it's going to be interesting. That first round matchup, you got all these teams right now from the Knicks down all the way to like the 10 seed that all have 17 losses. Some of those teams are playoff tested teams. No, they don't have a lot of playoff, like the Pacers, but Boston, Miami, Toronto, you might see one of those tough-minded veteran teams down the bottom of the playoff ledger there. And if I got to go into a place and play like Toronto, or I guess it'll be Tampa this year, or Miami or Boston, and Shake Milton's my best option to come in and score some points for me, that's where I feel like they really need to upgrade that bench spot. Now, the other night, they scored 42 points off the bench. So it seems to be inconsistent, but I think we know what they are.
Yeah, Shake, I think, and he's still, I think we want to talk about Ben Simmons being 24. Shake Milton's 24. He's still progressing in a way too. Like he's still figuring some things out. And, Doc Rivers talked about that Dallas game, saying it was his best point guard game of the season. I think he had 7 assists that night. And he didn't shoot the ball particularly well that night, but he looked good. He was getting to his spots. He was creating. He was getting open looks for other players. And that's something they've lacked all season long. The Cleveland game, he wasn't quite as effective, flat out. He just really wasn't. And so I think that's part of the reason why I would still like to see them get an experienced point guard, because, if you get a playoff tested guy, again, a bench guy, not, it doesn't have to be a starter caliber player, but a solid reserve point guard that can run the offense, that can get the team into their sets, and you're taking some pressure off of Shake Milton. So, maybe at times the offense kind of sort of will run through him. Like maybe if it's him and Ben in the game, you'll see some 2-man game with them, or, some pick and roll with those two. But I do think a point guard, a true point guard, would help Shake Milton take some pressure off of him, allow him maybe to focus more on being a scorer. And I think that could go a long way. So I think the biggest thing, Mike, is just, they need upgrades. I mean, flat out. And I'm sure Daryl Morey sees it too. They have a little bit of time here, and I'm sure he's going to evaluate things. And they like you mentioned too. I mean, teams like Miami and Boston, I think when it's all said and done, they're going to be much higher than they're sitting right now. I think they're going to fall into like those 4 and 5 spots eventually. But there's going to be tough teams. You mentioned the Raptors down in Tampa. That's if they want to be in the 7 seed and you're like the 2 seed, that is not a fun matchup. So they definitely need to upgrade. They definitely aren't, to me, not good enough where they can just go into the playoffs of what they have.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me ask you this. If the Sixers, if they ended up the number 1 seed, would you think, now it's hard to project and crystal ball it, but if they held on to this number 1 seed, would they be viewed as the favorite as a number 1 seed? Or do you think they would feel more like that Atlanta Hawks team or the Raptors that was the 1 seed that no one really believed in? If they're able to hold on to the number 1 seed, do you think that they would be the clear favorite?
I would say no, only because I think a lot of people are going to look at the Nets and see that trio and see the firepower they have and just think that, and it's a fair thing in a playoff series. How do you keep all 3 of those guys down? Or, 2 out of 3, 1 out of 3 down for an entire playoff series? That's a really difficult thing to do. So I think from that perspective alone, as we sit here today, if they don't make any moves, if their roster looks like it is, I think a lot of people will still view the Nets as kind of being that favorite. And we can't forget about the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, they had a really bad stretch recently, but you got to remember they didn't have Drew Holiday, I think, for like 10 games, and he's been terrific for them when he has played. So that's been a big factor as well. So there's going to be so much I think that's going to happen between, first of all, now and then the trade deadline, and then from the trade deadline to the end of the season. I just think we're gonna learn so much about the Sixers, about the Nets, about the Bucks, and the Heat and the Celtics to see if they do go on that second half run and, make up for lost time that they had, with some of the things they've been going through, especially the Heat, how beat up they've been because of, the health and safety protocol. So, as we sit here today, would the Sixers be the presumed favorite? I would say no. I think a lot of people would view the Nets as that, and I would get why, because of that trio, because of the firepower they have.
What do we know about the possibility of missing both Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris tonight? I know they don't have anything official yet, but any feeling on at least Harris, because he has not played. Now, apparently Embiid tweaked that in the pregame and then played, and then maybe it kind of got swollen after the game. So what do we know about those two?
Yeah, and you saw in the Cleveland game at one point, Embiid reached down, was feeling a little gimpy, but then he came and he scored 41 points, so he was good enough to do that. We'll see. I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen here. I know Tobias Harris is a guy that's he's going to try to play. That might not be what Doc Rivers wants or the medical staff wants, but he's a guy that wants to play every single game. I talked to you last time about how ridiculous his durability has been and how he's barely missed any time as a Sixer. I think that was the 6th game he's missed since he got here. And three of those games he missed were because of the health and safety protocols earlier this season. So he's a guy that just doesn't miss time. So if I had to, it's so, I don't want to guess because it's so hard, questionable. And I would think the Sixers would tend to play it safe this close to the All-Star break. If either guy is kind of feeling, like not quite right, I would think you would sit them, but we'll see. Tobias Harris will probably be out on the floor at about 5 p.m. Joel Embiid likes to do it a little bit later, so we'll probably know about him a little bit later on. But, we'll talk to Doc Rivers at 5:30. We'll get the 5:30 injury report, and we'll see what happens. But like I said, Tobias Harris is a guy, I think he's going to try everything in his power to try to play tonight. And we'll see if Doc Rivers and the staff kind of temper him down and maybe hold him back.
Yeah, and Kevin McCormick will have an update with Josh tonight during game night. And Paul will be at the Wells Fargo Center tonight, so follow him at Paul Hudrick as well for the updates from the Sixers and, of course, that injury report, because no Joel Embiid and no Tobias Harris would be a huge loss for those guys. And obviously it would turn to Ben Simmons, who, he makes that three the other night with ease. I mean, he looks like that's a shot that he shoots all the time. Perfect form, swish, and, of course, it was a bad beat for the people who bet that game out there. But that's one of the more head-scratching situations. The guy just calmly dribbles up the court, pulls up from 2 feet behind the line, and swishes that thing. I mean, how apropos was that?
Well, no pressure. You know what I mean? I mean, the game was lost, so what does he have to lose by chucking it up there? And then the funniest part to me, Mike, is that he's been shooting free throws so well recently. Yeah, I think he went 1 of 6 that night, and then he cans a 3. It was a weird,
crazy.
Like, don't get me wrong, they didn't play well, but it was also a funky night. Like, they just had, again, Seth Curry going 1 of 13. It's just they had some weird luck. In addition to them not playing very well and coming out flat, it's just a weird game.
It was,
but that was the funniest part to me, is him missing free throws and then knocking down that 3.
And pure. I mean, just a perfect, delivery and form and swisheroni. I know we talked to you, I guess, Friday about Paul Reed, but man, I didn't realize McCormick wrote an article about him, just about how good he was. Over 40%. He's having another big game today. I mean, is he somebody that maybe not this year, but that has exceeded what they thought they were getting in terms of what type of talent they got?
I'm probably the wrong guy to ask because I loved Paul Reed coming out. I thought he should have never lasted to the 58th pick because I thought I saw enough where I thought, okay, this guy's got potential. He's really awkward. When you watch him play, it doesn't always look pretty, but man, he gets the job done. Even the jumper, like you said, he's shooting over 40% from 3. You look at that thing, it does not look like he has any business shooting that well from 3, but it goes in. I think of a guy like Sean Marion, who was so good for so long at shooting threes, and his swarm was one of the worst swarms I've ever seen. But Paul Reed, he's tall, he's long, he's athletic, he's active. We saw it in his brief time with the Sixers. He'll hit the offensive glass. I mean, he's already got a couple of like the components the Sixers are looking for, right? He's hitting threes, he hustles, and he hits the offensive glass. He can set screens and he can roll. He's got a lot of the things that you would like. Like you said, this year, no, probably not a guy that can help you this year. We'll see when the G League season's over and he gets to spend some time here. Maybe he gets some mop-up duty, or you never know, with injuries or whatever, or trades, maybe he gets a little bit of a look. But to me, he's a guy that, I have my eye on as possibly being an NBA player. And I think I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's almost half of the guys that are on NBA rosters to start this season spent time in the G League. So it's not like it's crazy to think, oh, yeah, this guy could be really good in the G League this year and then become a viable NBA player next year. It happens all the time. So I like him a lot. I think he has the look of a guy who can help an NBA team down the road. And I think he's got a lot of what the Sixers are going to be looking for, next year and going forward.
Yeah, follow along and read the article from Kevin over at 973ESPN.com about Paul Reed. We had him on the show way back when. Very interesting guy, very soft-spoken, but he has really expanded that game. He's about 42% from three. Could be possibly a stretch four kind of guy down the road. Who knows as he keeps expanding. But he's having another big day today for the Blue Coats. All right, Inside the Sixers with Paul Hudrick. They are back tonight. They play the Pacers and then the Jazz on Wednesday, and then they hit the All-Star break, and they'll be back next Thursday. So a little time off for the 76ers for the All-Star break, but Inside the Sixers is here. We'll have a lot of trade conversation because that's really the next step for this team. What are they going to go out and go get to improve this team? We all know they got to do something. We'll have more on that coming up during Inside the Sixers all week long. Paul, thanks, man.
You got it, Mike.
Paul is back on Wednesday, and, of course, he'll be at the Wells Fargo Center tonight where more fans are going to be allowed in the building. I say more, some fans are going to be allowed in the building. Go to our website, 973ESPN.com, for the details.